A few other types of applied psychology, a brief look at a few different areas. So, just as a reminder, applied psychology is applying psychological principles to situations involving humans and their behaviors. So, trying to be trained enough to make things go more smoothly depending on the situation, to help out in a school, to help out at a clinic, to help out in a sports arena, to help out in all kinds of things with all kinds of populations. So one population is geropsychology, or one gero, the geriatric population. Applying psychology to it would make it applied geropsychology. So later adulthood, generally age 65 and above. A few statistics to suggest why this is a growing area of psychological focus. The global population is aging. Surely you've heard that many times in many arenas. They even talk about like the silver tsunami of all the different drivers are going to be 65 age and above. But 8% of the global population is over age 65, and probably that's even higher now, 10 or 12%, based on when these statistics were from, versus 2% 100 years ago. So progress in that area. Centenarians is the word for people who are 100 years of age or more. Supercentenarians is 110 or more. The centenarians, though, are proportionally the fastest growing age range. There were 70,000 of them in 2008, roughly 240,000 to be projected in 2020. And that'll be, new people for the most part. Those 70,000 will, people who were in their 100s die sooner than later, obviously. And so by 2020, there'll be a whole other group and there'll be more of them. Later adulthood, it depends on how you see it. This is different from a lot of things like sports and school and health. If you see older people as burdens, as something that's in your way, moving too slowly, and you need to move them out of your way, or do you see them as something that you can draw lots of wisdom from, and you would like to be supported by, and gain knowledge from, and pass on knowledge to, back and forth? So burden or benefit, your personal view can influence that to some degree. But geropsychology bases its ideas off of thinking about people as aging, and aged, although they don't necessarily focus on all three of these the same. So age reflects differences in people groups of differing ages. So just how are 70-year-olds different from 20-year-olds? How are 2-year-olds different from 52-year-olds? It's an age group that you're in. And what are those needs that they have at different ages? Aging is thinking about the function across the lifespan. How does this occur, and how can it more smoothly occur? And then the aged, study of issues facing different groups of elderly, so people who are aged, who have aged. Geropsychology, or applied geropsychology, is more concerned with the latter, although it could handle all three of those we just said. But it is more concerned with the aged and how to make their current state of living a little more successful. Studies of issues impacting different elderly groups from a psychological perspective, how to develop settings for people with dementia versus people not with dementia, people with chronic health problems, the very able, etc. There's all kinds of different groups, different group housings and settings that are popping up over time to influence basically how people are able to age. What are they allowed to do? Examples of what somebody might be looking into is research-wise or support-wise. How to reduce stereotypes. How to get other people not to be so cranky about older people. Thinking of quality of life and aging in place. Better care units for Alzheimer's patients, etc. Things like aging in place means if they've lived somewhere for their whole lives and they would like to still live there, what supports can be put in? How can the house be changed? How can the neighborhood be set up? There's a place in Columbia, Missouri, for example, I think it's called Tiger Village or something. It's got a special name and it's something about tiger. And anyway, it's a building built. It's a large building built to be supportive to people who have aging needs that are aged, and it's got nursing stations built in, and they can monitor your movements in your apartment. So it seems a little creepy, but I mean, you sign on because you want to be monitored, and they can tell if you've fallen, or if your heart rate is not at a right level, and they can come intervene sooner. And so it's a way to allow them to live at a place longer and be supportive. Here in Cape Girardeau, there is sort of that idea, not quite, but sort of like the whole Saxony Village setting, where they have the Lutheran home for the people who need more support, but the houses, the detached houses for people who need less support, then the apartments you can move into, then on to the nursing home setting and the Lutheran home. So there's a progression, but you can age in place in this larger setting, depending on your personal needs. Everybody probably would rather age in place in the home they started with or had for the past 20 years, but sometimes that's not able to be done. So then the question is how to make that more likely. So geropsychology interested in those sorts of things. All right, so military psychology, different, obviously, looking at a different population. It's defined not by a set of skills. So you could be a clinical psychologist, a forensic psychologist, people that are not specially trained in military per se, but you get some sort of credentials. Like you didn't go to a training program for military psychology, but you get some other credentials for that. But it's defined as just applying psychological principles to military, people in military, people involved in national defense. And as you would know, if you're paying any attention to the news, the things that they would most likely work on to try to address: PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, resilience and suicide, really, how to keep people who return from military or are on active military from harming themselves if they're getting depressed or overwhelmed by the things that happen. Substance abuse issues, the entire rape discussion that's going on, sexual assaults that are rampant in the military culture, how to address the culture. That's almost thinking of it from an IO perspective. Inclusion, how to include people from different sexual orientations, different mental health levels. There's all kinds of things to be discussed. And because the military has taken lots more attention over the past few years, this is a field that's poised to expand. I came across this Center for Deployment Psychology. So if this military psychology is an area you're interested in, deploymentpsych.org. It is, it talks about the different disorders. I didn't even mention just traumatic brain injury, chronic pain, but certainly suicide, military sexual assault, depression, post-PTSD, trainings they can offer, then just discussion of military culture, because it does definitely have its own culture. So, FYI. All right, aviation psychology. The study of psychological aspects of flying aircrafts, kind of specific. And this has been in the news quite a bit lately as different pilots do different things that are very questionable. A few years back, those pilots flew hundreds of miles past where they were supposed to stop, and they didn't even think about it. This guy recently who crashed the plane, and they're still trying to figure out why did he want to do that and lock the other person out so that he would crash the plane. With that large of machinery, with that many people in a volatile situation, trying to understand best how to train and support people in those roles is why aviation psychology arose. So, but it did stem from sort of an IO background, human and machine interactions. How does how does that machinery and those people interact best? Because the pilot is needing to aviate, to actually fly the plane, to navigate, to pay attention to what path they're on, to follow procedures, use the different instruments, when to use the landing gear, when to this, when to that, and then interface with the other crew and the people that are on the plane. So it's trying to best understand how do they better interact with the computers? How can the humans interact best with the computers? Situational awareness. How do they keep all this attention focused and remain aware of each situation as it needs to take forefront? How do you select pilots? How do you best train them? How do you manage the crew? How do you best select them? What kinds of situations make it more likely that the crew will work better together? And then how do decisions get made for the descent or the decision to turn around, things like that. They're always trying to make those more likely to be smoothly handled. Traffic psychology, trying to understand the cognitive, social, and behavioral relationships between people and their vehicles. And this actually isn't discussed much in the news, but this idea is big in the news because we're starting to see commercials for cars that can drive themselves, that can park themselves, that can tell 6 or 7 cars ahead that there's going to be a wreck and then adjust accordingly. So you know good and well that there is a traffic psychologist or two involved in this discussion and involved in this trying to figure out what's best. So monitoring brain activity while driving, sort of so the car can decide to make decisions before you would make those decisions, whether that sounds good or bad. Always with an eye to safety, trying to understand what are the different needs for older drivers and younger drivers, and then that would interface well with the whole geropsychology discussion. And then just internal influences on driving. When you're tired, when you're upset, and then how can the car adjust to that, or how can you adjust to the car? So lots of things that would go into trying to figure out traffic psychology. Psychology of immigration. With 12.9% of the U.S. population foreign-born at this point, and 1 in 5 in the U.S. a first or second-generation immigrant, and 30% of 18 to 34-year-olds are first or second immigrants. And all this discussion of more and more and more immigration leads to this psychology of immigration being an important thing to think about, sort of a burgeoning area of applied psychology. How are the immigrants received? Is there discrimination? Is there a place for them? Is it like last summer when children were just sort of sent across the border, and where were they housed and how were they supported? Acculturation. How do they make changes within themselves, basically, to fit with the majority culture? What do they stop doing? What do they continue doing? How do they fit in? How do they fit themselves in? And how does that make them feel? Does it make them depressed? Does it make them feel better about themselves? Each person's going to handle that a little differently. And then, are there traumatic stress reasons for why they moved here? Were they fleeing some genocide or some major war situations? So they could be dealing with psychological concerns already before they even get here. Lots of things to think about with that. A short discussion on psychology and global climate change. Basically, it's trying to understand, it's sort of connected to the conservation, sort of not, but trying to understand what are the human causes of climate change, what are human responses to, what are human consequences from, and helping to determine what behavior should be changed, what might not be changed, what is better, what's not. You start hearing these phrases like carbon footprint, packing in and packing out, trying to keep the balance of the environment as it was, to do your part in the climate change. And then just a little bit about psychology and food, just some examples. This is not necessarily a specific area, but there's always an interest in determining why do people have relationships with their food that they do. So trying to figure out the acceptability of food. Is there acceptable or not acceptable eating patterns? How does your family and culture train you? As to hoard food, to eat certain types of food, and say no to others. What are those patterns and how does that shape your emotional experience? Religious beliefs. Does your food need to be kosher? Does it need to be halal? And how does all that factor in? Does it need to be deep fried? Sensory experiences, sight and odor of food, and how does that attract you? And restaurants pay good money to figure all that out. How to put it out there so that you'll want to come get it. And then sustainability, and that's a big environmental movement. How to grow what we need and no more, no less. What to do with it? How to store it? How to make sure everybody takes their fair share and not more. All those things. And then nutrition and health, and this gets sort of into the health psychology field again. How to balance everything so that we run out of need for eating disorders and obesity treatments. We all just kind of stay in the supportive middle where we need to be, and we're eating the right balance, and so on and so forth. So a variety of views of psychology, all kinds of different areas. A lot of these are not overly well known and not large movements, but are specific areas and poised to grow some more.